So for those of you who have been following my channel, previously I have introduced the ultimate Sonos home theater setup with the Sonos ARC soundbar with two Sonos Fives as the surround speakers and supported in the bass department by two Sonos subs. Today I'm revisiting that claim and I want to show you the true ultimate home theater setup with Sonos. And trust me, this is going to blow you out of the seat like it did for me, and it is really gonna cost you like a lot of money. Now, in order not to drag you further into the video, before I reveal the answer, let me give it to you up front. Now, this is a setup that consists of the Sonos ARC, still supported in the bass department with two Sonos subwoofers, but this time with a Sonos amp driving two Sonance in-ceiling speakers for surround duties. Let's take a look at the cost to achieve this. Now we're talking about the Sonos ARC itself as the starting point of $900 US. Now I'm not going to use the $899, so you'll be rounding off to the nearest $10 to make my calculations a little bit easier. And the subs are $750 each. That's $1,005. That brings us to the price before adding the surrounds at $2,400 US. Then to add the surround, you'll need the Sonos amp at $700 and the Sonance in-ceiling speakers at $660 a pair. So that's $1,360 more just to add those ceiling speakers for surround. Now this brings the total to $3,760, and that is a lot of money to pay. Now let's compare it with the previous ultimate setup using the Fives. The same base of the Sonos ARC and the two subs will be $2,400 US. Each of the Fives are going to cost you USD 550, and that's $1,100 more. That brings the total to $3,500 US, which is $260 less, still a lot of money. Now, at this point, I'm going to say that a lot of us are going to be well served with just the Sonos ARC at $900 and the Sub Mini at $430 with a IKEA Symphonics bookshelves at $200 for the pair. This will give us a great full surround sound system with a subwoofer at $1,530. So you're able to get a full setup for a lot less than half the price of the setup that we are talking about here today. Now, you can even trade down to the Sonos Beam Gen 2, which will still give you Dolby Atmos and save even more. But for those of you who are already in this Sonos rabbit hole and need to keep chasing it to endgame, this is it. Now, here it is, right? In my opinion, this is the ultimate Sonos ARC home theater setup. Now, I also have to say, I'm just conveniently leaving out the fact that you do need professional help to install the speakers into your ceiling, your false ceiling. I had help. I did some renovation, so I actually made these false ceiling with reinforced plywood so that I don't get nasty vibrations from the speakers, which will throw the sound off. So at the end of the day, with the installation and the speaker cables, you're going to hit closer to $4,000 US, depending on which part of the world you are at and how much the labor costs. Right? Speaking of the speaker cables, I use KabelDirekt 14 gauge cables. Now they are pure copper cables. For one, I don't believe in paying for exotic cables, and I find these to be of exceptional build quality, and the thickness of the cable seems to be true to spec. Now, I'm leaving all the affiliate links in the video description down below, so if you're looking for those are the ones that I bought for the project, so you can be sure that they are up to the job. Now, some of you might think that you can get in-ceiling speakers for a lot less money. Yes, you can go without Sonance in-ceiling speakers, and they will cost a lot less. I was using the Yamaha in-ceiling speakers, but that will disable TruePlay. Now, when you set up the Sonos amp with speakers, it will detect if they are the Sonos speakers by playing a high-pitched sound, which you can actually hear. Now, only when the Sonos speakers are detected, the TruePlay function can be enabled. So if you don't use the Sonos speakers, you will not get TruePlay, even though you are pairing it with the Sonos ARC, which can perform TruePlay on its own. Now, I know some of you might think that this is probably not ideal placement for the surround sounds. Well, I thought the same. Surround sound, the speakers need to be at ear level, right? Some of you have asked me before, and I've told you guys that it was okay to deviate just a little bit. I went as far as to place my Sonos Play 3s on the floor, and they still deliver the surround effect. Now, I've also advised some friends to place the Sonos One mounted high on the wall near the ceiling, and they seem to be happy with it. But to have surround speakers mounted on an overhead position in the ceiling seems to be carrying it just a little too far. Or so I thought, right? It wasn't something that I could experiment with because I was going to have to cut holes into the ceiling. Now, I took the leap of faith and the results were just mind-blowing. So for those of you who still want the surround effects to be at the ear level as recommended, you can still use the Sonos M, but to drive the Sonos in-wall architectural speakers. Now, that will require you to either hack part of the wall away or to cut into the partition wall or the drywall. Now, I had the opportunity to do that, but I didn't. I went for in-ceiling. But I was glad I went with the in-ceiling route because the atmospheric presence of the setup gave a very enveloping effect. Now, there's something about sound coming from above, right? I did take some care in the placement of the speakers though. I moved them as far back as I could, and not as far back as to cause the sound to bounce off the rear walls. I positioned them as far apart as I could, but not as far as to have the sound bounce off the side walls. Now, the most important trick that I deployed was to swivel the cones of the in-ceiling speakers from Sonance. Now, these Sonance in-ceiling speakers, they have removable grills which are held strongly in place by magnets. And so they're easy to remove and they're easy to put back. And they are also paintable, so you can actually paint them to match your ceiling color. But more importantly, after you remove them, you can actually swivel the cones around the speaker within the housing in any direction. Now, I pointed the cone towards the back of the room. That's the back of the room, and that's the front where the TV and the Sonos ARC is. You can point them in any direction, so I pointed them towards the back and I angled them slightly towards my listening position, which is in the middle. Now, this way, I directed the sounds to come to my main listening position. So the question is, how is the sound? And is the sound stage accurate? Now, I have to say this. The sound is incredible. The surround came across as very powerful. The soundstage was very, very full. And because the sound was coming from above you, it gave a great sense of presence, and the ability of the surround sound to really envelop you was just beyond words and beyond measure. But accuracy would definitely take a slight hit. Now, because those sounds were meant to come from behind you and from the sides and at ear level, but now they're coming from you from above. Now, to test this, I actually fired up Gran Turismo 7. It's a racing game on the Sony PlayStation 5. Now, this racing game realistically plays sounds of cars if they're coming from behind you, either to the left or to the right of you. But if you're not able to sight them visually by turning your head, right, because it's just a game, you could only rely on the sound of the engine roar coming from behind you. Now, I have to say I was able to play the game effectively still, being able to tell where the cars are coming from based on the sound. So I think, to me, that is a pass. Now, at this point, you might be wondering how it really sounds like. I have a recording which I made with my regular Dolby Atmos test video. I'm going to be recording into the Zoom H3. Where's my Zoom H3? Just give me a minute. Yep, and this is the Zoom H3. It is a 360 mic. Now, this should capture sound from all around the new studio, and this will be in a standardized position for all my testing now that I have the whole studio built out for myself. So I'm going to be placing this mic on this stand here, all right? And it's going to be placed on my sitting position right here. I'm going to turn it around and I will play the video right here on the screen. It should allow you to hear what I have been listening to from this exact position where I am listening to the music or watching the movie or playing the game. Ready? Let's go.
This is Dolby Atmos, the world's first object-based cinematic audio. With powerful moving audio that transcends from channels to moving around you with pinpoint accuracy. Whether the soundscape sets the mood of a scene, or captures the full extent of nature's fury.
So now that you have heard it for yourself, you might be wondering about the actual frequency response of this setup. Now I have the mini DSP you might want permanently mounted and connected into the ceiling. Now it's not going to be moved anywhere, and it will be in the same location for any test I'll be performing in this studio from now on, so that you get the same basis of comparison across all the videos and the tests that I will be making from this point onwards. Now to give you an idea, the room is about 12.5 feet wide, and it is about 9.5 feet deep, right, from here, from the back wall to the TV, and the ceiling has been lowered artificially to about 8 feet. So it's not a big room, but it's fully enclosed to ensure that we have a controlled environment. Now the wall to my left is almost covered by full height curtains, and the partition walls are built up with 100 kg per cubic meter density rock wool, and the wall with the TV console is a solid brick wall. The floor has been covered with acoustically dampened carpets, which I spent a bomb on, and finally the door is acoustically sealed and is made out of solid wood. Now I know this is not something that is typical of a setup for most homes, but this is what I have done so that I can control the testing environment. This is my commitment to the channel, and I really hope that you can appreciate all the work and the investment that I've put into this channel. Now, primarily, this is still going to come across as a hobby of mine, and I will likely give this channel a little bit more focus. Now, for those of you who would like to support my work, I have a Patreon account, which you can send some coffee money my way. I have the QR code right here on the screen, which you can scan, or you can click in the link in the video description down below. Now, the easier way to do this is, of course, to use the YouTube Super Thanks button just below this video to give a one-time contribution to help defray the cost of me doing my work, making all these videos, and doing the testing for you. Now, to give you a rough estimate, I spent more than about 20,000 Singapore dollars on this new setup, which is the rough equivalent of about 15,000 US dollars. It's gonna take me a long time to recover this investment. So let's get to that. This is the set of frequency response sweeps. Now, this is the first that you viewers out there are seeing out of my new studio. Now, I've broken this up into 3 different curves. The first curve is in white, and that's the Sonos ARC on its own. Then I will engage both the subs, and that will be what you're getting indicated in green. Now, in red, that will be the frequency response sweep for the full setup with the Sonos ARC with 2 subs and the amp driving the 2 Sonance in-ceiling speakers. So let's take a look at the first chart with the white curve. Now, this is of the Sonos ARC on its own. Now, I'm actually pretty pleased at the frequency response sweep, indicating that my new room setup is actually pretty neutral. You'll see that the frequency response sweep is relatively flat. Now, when I do this set of frequency response sweep, I'm basically playing a series of tones all the way from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. all at the same volume. So if the soundbar in question interacts perfectly with the room, the mic should pick up the same amplitude throughout the entire range. But of course, no speaker, no system, no setup, and no room is perfect. So we just try to get it as close to flat as reasonably possible. So looking at the Sonos ARC between 100Hz and 800Hz, the response is slightly boosted, slightly lifted. Now, this actually indicates that there is an emphasis on the vocal range of the human voice. Now, I've been happy with the way that Sonos is making dialogue sound since firmware version, I think is 14.18, yeah, that's right. And right now we are at 14.20, and the sound profile is pretty consistent. There is an emphasis on the vocal range. Now from 800Hz all the way to 10 kHz, it flattens out at lower levels, but the response is still pretty flat and consistent throughout the entire range. From 10 kHz onwards, you'll notice that the Sonos ARC tails off the response up to 20 kHz, and this is slightly different from the original ARC response curve when it was launched about 2.5 years ago, when there was an emphasis on the top range at about 17 kHz, where there is an unexplained bump in the response that came across to most people as a metallic ringing sounding top end, which was irritating and piercing to some people with sensitive ears. Now, this is no longer the case. Actually, what I really wanted to point out is that the Sonos ARC isn't quite the performer on its own when it comes to bass. Now, at the 100Hz mark, you'll notice that the bass drop-off is pretty steep and is consistent all the way down from there. Now, you will not get a great amount of bass from the Sonos ARC on its own, and that's where the subs will come in. Which brings us to the green curve. Now, the green curve is the frequency response when I add dual subs to the Sonos ARC. So it's a sub Gen 3 and a sub Gen 2. You need at least one sub Gen 3 to do dual pairing of subs, and you cannot pair a sub mini into the setup. Now, it will fill up the frequency response all the way from below 100Hz very nicely, and notice that it does not start to tail off until about 35Hz or so. Now, even then, at 20Hz, the volume is still quite a lot louder than the Sonos ARC on its own. You will still hear bass at 20Hz. Now, to me, adding a subwoofer is one of the most important upgrades that you can perform for any home theater setup, and in this case, you can see why I say that. Now, the rest of the curve from 100Hz onwards is not really impacted at all, and the sound signature remains consistent for the mid-range and the higher frequencies. Now, next, we will visit the red curve. The red curve is when I add the Sonos amp powering two Sonance in-ceiling speakers as surrounds to the Sonos ARC and the dual setup. Now, you can barely notice the difference between the green curve and the red curve. In fact, the red curve almost replicates the green curve completely, and you can see only the green curve deviating very slightly at some points. Now, for all intents and purposes, you can sort of say that the sound signature is exactly the same. Now, does it mean that adding the Sonos amp with in-ceiling speakers makes no difference at all? Well, no, not really, because without surround speakers, the surround sound is actually playing from the Sonos ARC itself, throwing out virtualized surround notes from the side-firing speakers. Now, they are not actual physical surround speakers from behind you, so you won't hear sounds from behind you, or you won't hear sounds from the side physically. Now, the frequency response test does not measure and take into account where the sound is coming from. So the fact that the frequency response is almost the same simply means that the sound signature is the same, meaning that the surround speakers are well integrated, just that where they're coming from, the other locations in the room, that there is no differentiation in the sound signature. There is no undue emphasis on the surround sound speakers and the volume. But you will notice a great immersion effect that you're not gonna get without actual surround speakers. In fact, because the surround sound effects are now coming from above you, it really feels that the entire surround sound stage is enveloping you, coming from all around you, creating a whole new level of immersion. Not to mention the fact that, you don't have speakers cluttering the floor space. So from here on, this will be my reference baseline setup. Any new soundbars or speakers that I test out will be with a mini DSP U Mic 1 in the same position mounted in my ceiling. and the room will not have things shifted around and everything will be standardized. I'm very pleased with this studio setup, this new setup, and I hope that this will bring further value to my future videos and for you viewers out there. Now we are in the first month of 2023 and it's a brand new year. I have no doubts that we are going to see something really exciting from Sonos very, very soon. Now, they have already launched the Sub Mini, which was a great product, was a very interesting product. They have committed to 2 product releases every year. The last announcement for the Sub Mini was about, 5 months ago? Yeah, it was about 5 months or 4 months ago. That was in September, right? So we are going to be hearing about a new product very, very soon. I might have a clue to what that is. Now, stay tuned to this channel and click subscribe if you have not already done so. And I'll be sharing with you what I think they'll be announcing in the coming weeks. So for those of you who are using the Sonos Fives as the rear surround speakers, do check out the speaker stands that I've placed them on. I feel that they are currently the best stands for the money and are built excellently. Now, I've done a review of them before and measured the performance of the Fives with and without the stands. Now, that might actually surprise you how much of a difference the stands make. So do check out the video right here and I will see you over in that video.